In the early 90s, I became somewhat obsessed with the films of Emir Kusturica, the acclaimed Sarajevo-born director who made such quirky, exuberant, evocatively carnivalesque films such as Underground and Black Cat, White Cat, which dazzled and befuddled me. I fell in love with the music in the films played by the No Smoking Orchestra, and this led me on to discover a whole world about gypsies, or rather, Romani people. I watched more films, listened to endless recordings of Roma music without knowing anything about them really, except a vague knowledge that their identity is bound up with the ideal of freedom through having no ties to a homeland. Oh, and wearing fabulous scarves and skirts, of course. In 2016, I was back in the midst of a musical love affair with Romani music. In particular, artists from the Balkans and Hungary, such as Tarif de Hajduk, Ando Drom, Kali Yag, Fanfare Chakalia, Boba Markovic, and of course, Esma Redzepova, the queen of the gypsies from Macedonia. I had the first of my long service leave as a music teacher coming up, and I began to fantasize about learning music with the Roma. That should be pretty simple to organise, I thought. Wrong. Big time wrong. Originating from northern India as a nomadic people, the Roma entered Europe between the 8th and 10th centuries. They were called gypsies because Europeans mistakenly believed they came from Egypt. Due to their dark skin, for centuries Roma were scorned and persecuted across Europe. Zigeuner, the German word for gypsy, derives from a Greek root meaning untouchable. Portrayed as cunning, mysterious outsiders who tell fortunes and steal before moving on to the next town. In 1554, the English Parliament passed a law that made being a gypsy a felony punishable by death. As a matter of survival, the Roma were continuously on the move, developing a reputation for a nomadic lifestyle and a highly insular culture. Back to my internet search for a Romani teacher to spend my long service leave with, and I came up with nothing. Nothing. For months, I sent emails to people I saw performing on YouTube, and I received nothing back. I read articles by ethnomusicologists and linguists who had written PhDs on Roma culture, and every single one had encountered a reluctance from Roma people to share their culture due to the commonplace systemic hate speech, harassment and violence against their people throughout Europe. One day I was looking at the Voice of Roma's site, and right down the bottom in tiny letters was an email address of an artist putting on a show somewhere in Germany. I sent my generic email to a one Shani Rafati, asking for any leads on learning Romani music, and struck gold. Within a day, I received this. From the heavens into my lap came a summer school for foreigners wishing to learn about Roma culture, music, dance in a Roma-only suburb in Skopje, Macedonia, called Shutka. I emailed back instantly, and Shani said I was the first on the list as he had only finalised the summer school the day before and it hadn't gone live yet on the internet. Macedonia, wherever that is, here I come. I arrived at a very humble building to the cacophony of saxophones, trumpets, clarinets, piano accordions and drums. I was greeted by a funny little man who I thought was a cleaner, but who actually turned out to be the host, and also a Macedonian musical legend known throughout the world as Feros the King. I still thought he was a cleaner or a handyman when I saw him tinkering with the student's broken clarinet, and he began blowing on it, checking to see if it was fixed, before proceeding to play an unbelievable 30-minute solo while other musicians joined him. What struck me was his utter mastery of his musical style. It was the first time I'd heard those Balkan trills and turns and roulades, and his virtuosity made him seem statuesque next to his tiny frame. Great, I thought, this is going to be a lot of fun. The other students came from all over the world: America, Denmark, the Netherlands, Germany, and me, the sole Southern Hemisphere gal. Shani talked us through the program for the next week, which involved weddings, after-dinner jams, weddings, dancing, weddings, music lessons, weddings, and a circumcision. Yes, a circumcision. All revolving around music and dance, of course. My singing teacher was a tyrant. She would interrupt me to say, "Is vulgar," throughout the hour's torturous session. Me, a trained classical singer with a postgraduate degree in music, vulgar, while I was told to mimic to a YouTube clip of Esma. I'll teach you, I thought, and practiced the triolas or the turns that I just couldn't perfect despite slowing YouTube down and analysing them again and again. "No, is vulgar and like Bulgarian." She'd laugh. Whatever. At night there were jams, which were so loud I had to stick napkins in my ears as we danced in circles for hours, intricate changes in the steps to reflect the odd time signatures and tempo changes. A lot of the people were international dance students, something I didn't even know existed, basically fancy folk dancing. There were all sorts of rules about the leader waving a hanky around and other stuff that went over my head. I spent the entire time with my eyes glued to whoever was next to me, desperately trying not to stuff up the rhythm of the circle while trying equally to look international and cool. We went to several large-scale events in Stuttgart, including a couple of pre-wedding parties, all featuring ear-splittingly and totally unnecessarily amplified bands. Shani had handed out earplugs before arriving, and there would have been a case of tinnitus for life without them. You couldn't talk, let alone shout to anybody during the music, it was that loud. All the while, the women danced a simple, repetitive step around and around and around in a circle as they held each other's hands. The men looked on but never joined in. During a break, we asked Shani why they only danced this step when we were learning all sorts of traditional Romani dances back at Feros's Inn. And he said that the Roma were losing their traditions fast, as so many cultures are with the advent of screens. Without the interest from international dancers recording the steps, it wouldn't take too much time before they were forgotten, he told us. The dress code was glitzy glamour with shiny metallic materials, buttons, lace, hennaed hands and lots of gold. Highly elaborate hairdos and over-the-top makeup teamed with frighteningly high stilettos topped it off. The band's rhythm section stayed in the corner, tethered to PowerPoints. However, the two singers and two alto saxophonists walked around the circle using cordless mics, taking it in turns to sing and solo to the bride and her family, with ever-fantastic cadenzas showing off their virtuosity like strutting peacocks and happily receiving the money that was stuffed into their belts, hat bands and even in the saxophone bell as they followed the circle. We were following the wedding party, leading up to the actual wedding of one of Shani's relatives. And us foreigners from the summer school all paid the family $100 US to be invited along. For these few days, the family were cordial in their welcoming of us, but we were very much on the outside looking in. We joined the circle dancing and shuffled around and around, dressed in our Roma pants and boleros, which another of Shani's cousins had brought for us ladies to wear, and enjoyed being able to participate in what we all knew were rituals not readily available for outsiders to witness. Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, is hardly a tourist destination, landlocked and hot as hell at this time of year, 40 degrees Celsius every day. And the suburb of Stuttgart is the last place most non-Roma Macedonians would want to find themselves in. With chronic unemployment and inadequate sewage system, unreliable electricity, terrible roads and overcrowding, the images that will stay with me when I think of Stuttgart are donkey-driven carts, hotted-up tractors and ride-on lawnmowers driven by mean-looking blokes versus Maserati and BMWs trying to overtake on a one-lane potholed road covered in water from a burst pipe, surrounded by illegally built flashy mansions next to shanty houses made from scrap metal, while street music from every direction blasted. Needless to say, I loved every minute of it. The day of the wedding came and we were told to stay at the back of the crowd and to observe rather than participate. Our wedding band featured local musicians from Ferris's Inn and also some of the lucky players from the summer school who had been learning tunes for the last week for the wedding day. The lineup was trumpets, saxophones, sousaphones and tapan, a drum which is hit with a whip, and a large mallet, giving it a bass drum sound with a high-pitched rapid tapping. An incredibly bored-looking young man, dressed up like Michael Jackson meets Colonel Gaddafi, sat in a horse-drawn carriage waiting to start. He was the groom. The women gathered in their glitzy outfits, the men looking fairly drab in pants and shirts, and off we went. A Roman wedding in Shutka takes many hours. Our band started the first of 100 variations of Air de Lazy, the famous Romany tune stolen by Goran Bregovic, who claimed himself as the composer, patented it, making it illegal for Roma to play, though that's another story which I won't get into here. Anyway, away we went, winding our way through the narrow streets, moving in between cars and donkey-drawn carts who took turns in pulling over in the one-lane street to allow the traffic to inch through. We came to a junction and I was amazed to see a different wedding coming around a corner. This wedding was playing zurnas and other traditional wind instruments I don't know the names of. Our weddings passed by in a cacophony of celebration while our ladies and their ladies checked each other out. We approached the bride's house where the men from her family refused entry to our party by holding spades and rakes up to us menacingly. Our men had to pay them money and give bottles of whiskey in an over-exaggerated hammy act before the farm implements were lowered and we could arrive at the bride's house. The bride eventually came out of her tizzy mansion and her family danced and danced in circles, weeping at the prospect of her leaving them. I couldn't help but think it was all for show, albeit an important show. Just the right amount of sorrow at leaving her family, but not so much that her in-laws would take offence. The band played mournful, excruciatingly loud music in her face for an hour as they danced in the circle before she climbed into the carriage with her still bored-looking beau. She now looked glum beside him and I wondered whether it was an arranged marriage, as the sparks were definitely not flying, to say the least. By this stage, the women began to welcome us into the fold, and I was utterly delighted when the groom's mother invited me to dance with her and some other women. They held my hands and we walked in the now twilight streets, through more burst pipe puddles to various versions of Air de Lazy coming from a multitude of different weddings, which we continued to bump into at nearly every street crossing, as the horse was made to rear again and again, probably in relation to how the groom's parents had paid for the spectacle. We passed a circumcision with little boys in fancy white outfits, including turbans, awaiting their fate. Beds, ornately decorated, moved to the outside porch of houses while guests, and of course the circumcision band, played ear-splitting music as the prepubescent boys are cut to the adoration of their nearest and dearest. We arrived back at the groom's house and the newlyweds descended the carriage. The bride's family kissed the girl and they wept as they unbraided her hair, a symbol for her new marital status. Her new mother-in-law helped the bride knot her kidlo, or headscarf, a sign that she is a married woman. And inside they went. It was over. The music stopped. We had walked for hours through the winding streets of this shanty town. I doubt I will ever return to Macedonia, but I will never forget those 10 crazy days that I spent experiencing some of the rituals and learning the music and dance of the Roma people of Shutka. I feel utterly blessed that I found Shani's email address and that the stars aligned to make it possible for me to travel halfway across the globe for that once-in-a-lifetime experience.